Principal Robert Mitchell had been running Westwood Academy for almost 15 years. He knew everything about his school, from the perfectly trimmed hedges in the courtyard to the expensive marble floors that gleamed under the chandelier lights. This wasn't just any school. It was where the children of doctors, lawyers, and business owners came to get the best education money could buy. On a cold Monday morning in January, Robert sat in his leather chair looking through the files on his desk. One file caught his attention. A new transfer student was starting today. The boy's name was David Chen, and he was coming in on a full scholarship. Robert flipped through the papers and felt his eyebrows raise. The boy came from Riverside, the part of town where most people struggled to make ends meet. His previous school had outdated textbooks and barely enough computers for the students. Robert leaned back in his chair and sighed. He had seen this story before. Some charitable organization would sponsor a kid from a poor neighborhood, give them a scholarship, and send them to Westwood thinking they were doing something noble. But most of these kids couldn't handle it. They didn't fit in. They didn't have the same background, the same culture, the same understanding of how things worked in places like this. Within a few months, they would drop out, and Robert would have to deal with the paperwork and the disappointed donors. He looked at David's photo clipped to the file. The boy had dark eyes and a serious expression. There was something about the way he looked at the camera that made Robert uncomfortable. It was like the boy was looking right through him, judging him somehow. Robert shook his head. He was being ridiculous. This was just another scholarship case that probably wouldn't work out. The morning bell rang and students began flooding through the hallways. Robert stood by his office window watching them. Designer backpacks, expensive sneakers, the latest smartphones in every hand. These kids came from families who could afford the $50,000 annual tuition without blinking. They had tutors, traveled during summers, and spoke multiple languages. How was a kid from Riverside supposed to compete with that? Around 10 in the morning, Robert decided to take a walk through the school. He liked to do this occasionally, just to remind everyone that he was watching. He walked past the science labs with their state-of-the-art equipment, past the library with thousands of books lining the walls, past the music room where a student was practicing piano on a Steinway Grand. Then he saw him. The new boy was standing alone near his locker, looking at a map of the school. His clothes were clean but clearly old. The jacket he wore had a small tear near the pocket that someone had tried to sew up. His sneakers were generic brand, probably from a discount store. He didn't have the confident posture that Westwood students usually carried. Instead, he seemed cautious, like he was walking through a museum where he wasn't supposed to touch anything. Robert watched as a group of students walked past David without even acknowledging him. One girl actually wrinkled her nose slightly as she passed. Robert felt a small twinge of something, maybe pity, maybe discomfort, but he pushed it away. This was the natural order of things. Some people belonged in certain places and others didn't. It wasn't cruel. It was just reality. Later that afternoon, Robert was talking with Mrs. Peterson, the English teacher, in the hallway. She mentioned that David had been in her class that morning. How did he do? Robert asked, trying to sound casual. Actually, he was very attentive, Mrs. Peterson said, adjusting her glasses. When I asked about the symbolism in the novel we're reading, he gave quite an insightful answer. I was impressed. Robert nodded but didn't say anything. One good answer didn't mean much. The real test would come when the coursework got harder. When the boy realized he was competing with students who had every advantage he didn't. Over the next few days, Robert found himself paying more attention to David than he wanted to admit. He noticed that the boy ate lunch alone in the corner of the cafeteria, usually with a book open next to his tray. He noticed that David never participated in the conversations that happened before class started, never joined any groups, never seemed to relax. He was always watching, always listening, always on guard. Robert told himself he was just keeping an eye on a new student, making sure everything was going smoothly. But deep down he was waiting for David to prove what Robert already believed, that he didn't belong here. By the end of the first week, Robert had convinced himself that bringing students like David to Westwood was almost cruel. The boy looked miserable. He didn't fit in with the other students. He didn't dress like them, talk like them, or carry himself like them. Wouldn't it be kinder to send him back to a school where he could be comfortable, where he wouldn't have to pretend to be something he wasn't? Robert thought about this as he organized papers in his office on Friday afternoon. The sun was setting outside his window, casting long shadows across the campus. He had built something special here at Westwood. The test scores were among the highest in the state. Graduates went on to Ivy League universities. Parents paid premium prices because they trusted him to maintain certain standards. And those standards, Robert believed, weren't just about academics. They were about maintaining a certain type of environment, a certain type of student body. When you mix students from completely different backgrounds, it created problems. The wealthy kids might look down on the poor ones. The poor kids might feel resentful or out of place. It was better to keep things separate, to let everyone stay where they were comfortable. At least that's what Robert told himself. He didn't think of himself as prejudiced or unfair. He thought of himself as practical, as someone who understood how the world really worked. He was just being realistic about David's chances of succeeding here. But as Robert locked his office and walked to his car that evening, he couldn't quite shake the image of David sitting alone in the cafeteria, reading his book. There was something about the boy's determination, the way he showed up every day and tried despite the cold shoulders and uncomfortable stares. It bothered Robert in a way he couldn't quite explain. He got in his expensive car and drove home to his large house in the nicest part of town. His own children were grown and gone now. His wife was visiting her sister. The house felt empty. Robert made himself dinner and sat in front of the television, but he wasn't really watching. He was thinking about Westwood Academy, about the type of school he had built, about the type of students he wanted there, and he was thinking about David Chen, the scholarship boy from Riverside, wondering how long it would take before the boy realized he was fighting a losing battle. Robert didn't know it yet, but his assumptions about this quiet, serious student were about to be tested in ways he never expected. The principal thought he knew everything about his school and the students who belonged there. He was about to learn just how wrong he really was. David's second week at Westwood Academy started normally enough. He had gotten used to the routine by now. Wake up early, take 2 buses to get to school, keep his head down, go to classes, eat lunch alone, and then take 2 buses back home. It wasn't the life he had imagined when he got the scholarship letter, but he wasn't going to complain. This was his chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. On Tuesday morning, everything changed. David was at his locker getting books for his next class when he heard voices nearby. 2 girls were talking in hushed but urgent tones. "I'm telling you, it's gone," one of them said. "My mom is going to kill me." "That watch cost $3,000. "Did you check everywhere?" her friend asked. "I've checked 10 times. Someone took it from my locker yesterday during gym class." David didn't think much of it. Rich kids lost expensive things all the time. They probably left stuff lying around and forgot where they put it. He closed his locker and headed to class. But by lunchtime, the whole school was buzzing with rumors. It wasn't just one watch. Over the past few days, several students had reported missing items. A designer wallet with $200 cash, a brand new tablet, a pair of expensive sunglasses, a gold bracelet. David sat in the cafeteria, eating his sandwich and trying to ignore the conversations happening around him. He noticed students glancing at him more than usual. Some of them would look at him, whisper to their friends, and then look away quickly when he made eye contact. He felt a knot forming in his stomach. He knew what they were thinking. The new kid from the poor neighborhood shows up, and suddenly things start disappearing. It didn't take a genius to figure out where their minds were going. After lunch, David was called to the principal's office. His heart started racing as he walked down the hallway. He had never been to the principal's office at his old school, never been in trouble. But he knew what this was about. Principal Mitchell's secretary told him to sit and wait. 20 minutes passed. David sat in the uncomfortable chair, watching the clock on the wall tick forward. He wondered if making him wait was part of the strategy, a way to make him nervous. Finally, the secretary told him to go in. Principal Mitchell was sitting behind his massive desk, looking at something on his computer screen. He didn't look up right away, just let David stand there for a few seconds before acknowledging him. "David, have a seat." David sat down in the chair across from the principal. The office was impressive, with wood paneling on the walls, diplomas and awards everywhere, and a large window overlooking the school grounds. "I suppose you know why you're here," Principal Mitchell said, finally looking at him. "I can guess," David replied, keeping his voice steady. "We've had some incidents lately. Valuable items going missing from lockers. I've been reviewing our security footage. David felt his hands clench into fists, but he kept them on his lap, where the principal couldn't see. And I've noticed you've been in the area where these thefts occurred, near those specific lockers, around the times when the items went missing. I have classes in that hallway, David said. So do about 100 other students. Principal Mitchell leaned back in his chair, studying David with an expression that made David's skin crawl. It wasn't the look of someone trying to solve a mystery. It was the look of someone who had already made up his mind. David, I want to be clear. I'm not formally accusing you of anything, but I think we need to have an honest conversation about whether this school is the right fit for you. The right fit? David repeated, feeling anger rising in his chest. Students from different backgrounds sometimes struggle to adapt to our environment here. The culture is different. The expectations are different. The temptations can be overwhelming. David couldn't believe what he was hearing. The principal wasn't even trying to hide what he was really saying. He wasn't investigating a theft. He was looking for an excuse to get rid of the scholarship kid. You think I stole those things because I'm poor? David said, his voice tight. I didn't say that, Principal Mitchell replied, but his tone said everything his words didn't. You didn't have to. David took a deep breath, trying to control his emotions. Am I being formally accused of theft? As I said, I'm not making any formal accusations at this time. Then am I free to go? Principal Mitchell looked annoyed that David wasn't reacting the way he expected. Maybe he thought the boy would break down, confess, or at least look guilty, but David just sat there, meeting his eyes with a steady gaze. Not quite yet, the principal said. I want to talk to you about something else. In 2 weeks, Westwood will be participating in the State Academic Decathlon. It's a prestigious competition that brings together the best students from schools across the state. David wasn't sure where this was going, but he stayed quiet and listened. We've never won the state championship, Principal Mitchell continued. We've come close, but never quite made it to the top. This year I want to change that. I'm forming a team of our best students. What does this have to do with me? David asked. I want you to join the team. David blinked, completely caught off guard. What? Consider it an opportunity, a chance to prove that you belong here at Westwood. If you can contribute to a winning team, show that you have what it takes to compete at this level, then perhaps we can put these other concerns behind us. David understood now. This wasn't an opportunity. It was a trap. A way for the principal to prove that he was right, that David didn't belong here. When the team lost, or when David couldn't keep up with the other students, the principal would have his excuse to suggest that maybe the scholarship had been a mistake. And if I don't join? David asked. Principal Mitchell smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Well, given the current situation with the thefts and your adjustment challenges, I would have to seriously reconsider whether this scholarship placement is in your best interest. I'd hate to see you struggle unnecessarily. There it was, the threat wrapped up in concern. Join the team and probably fail, or refuse and get kicked out immediately. David felt something change inside him at that moment. He had come to Westwood hoping to just get through it, to keep his head down and earn his diploma. But now this principal was trying to push him out based on nothing but assumptions and prejudice. The man had already decided David was guilty, already decided he didn't belong, already decided he wasn't good enough. I'll join the team, David said quietly. Excellent, Principal Mitchell said, looking pleased with himself. Practice starts next Monday. Don't be late. David stood up to leave, but then he turned back at the door. Principal Mitchell, you should know something. I didn't take those things, and I'm going to prove that I belong here, not because you think I should, but because I know I do. He walked out before the principal could respond. His heart was pounding and his hands were shaking, but he kept his head high as he walked down the hallway. Students stared at him as he passed, probably wondering what had happened in the principal's office. David didn't care anymore what they thought. He had been given a challenge and he was going to meet it. Not for Principal Mitchell's approval, but for himself. To prove that where you came from didn't determine where you could go. What the principal didn't know, what nobody at Westwood knew, was that David had spent years developing skills that would shock everyone in that school. His life had been harder than any of these privileged students could imagine, but it had also made him stronger and smarter than they could possibly understand. The real test was about to begin, and Principal Mitchell had no idea what he had just started. David walked home that evening with the principal's challenge weighing on his mind. The 2 bus rides felt longer than usual. He stared out the window, watching the neighborhoods change from the wealthy area where Westwood Academy stood to the working-class streets of Riverside where he lived. When he finally reached his apartment building, he climbed the 3 flights of stairs slowly. His legs were tired, but it was more than that. He was carrying the weight of everything that had happened today. The accusation, the threat, the impossible challenge. He unlocked the door to apartment 3B and stepped inside. The smell of overcooked vegetables hit him immediately. Mrs. Liu from next door was cooking again, and the smell always seeped through the thin walls. David didn't mind. It reminded him he wasn't alone in this building full of people trying to make it through each day. "David, is that you?" His mother's voice called from the living room. "Yeah, Mom, it's me." He walked into the small living room and found his mother sitting in her usual chair by the window. She was 52 years old, but lately she looked older. Her hair had more gray in it than it did last year. Her hands shook slightly as she held a photo album in her lap. "I was looking at pictures," she said, smiling at him. "Do you remember when we went to the beach?" "You were so little." David's heart sank. They had never been to the beach. His mother was having one of her confused days again. The doctor had told him this would happen more often. Early onset dementia, they called it. Some days she was perfectly fine, sharp as ever. Other days she mixed up memories, forgot things, or believed stories that had never happened. "That sounds nice, Mom," David said gently. He had learned not to correct her when she was like this. It only made her upset and confused. "How was school?" she asked, and for a moment her eyes cleared. She was back with him in the present. It was okay, David lied. He never told her about the problems at school. She had enough to worry about. "Are you eating enough? You look thin." "I'm fine, Mom. I had a good lunch." Another lie. He had eaten a peanut butter sandwich he made that morning because the cafeteria food was too expensive. His mother nodded, seemingly satisfied. Then her eyes drifted back to the photo album, and David knew she was slipping away again into whatever memories or dreams filled her mind. He went to the kitchen and started making dinner. Rice, some vegetables, and a little bit of chicken he had stretched to last 3 days. While the rice cooker hummed, David pulled out his laptop. It was old. A model from 6 years ago that someone had thrown away. He had found it in a dumpster behind an electronics store, brought it home and spent 2 weeks fixing it using YouTube videos and library books. That was how David had learned most things. His old school didn't have great teachers or new textbooks. The computers in the library were always broken or outdated, so David taught himself. He spent hours in the public library after school, reading everything he could find. Science books, math textbooks, philosophy, history, literature. When his mother first started getting sick 3 years ago, David had to learn how to take care of her. He researched her condition, learned about memory techniques, created systems to help her remember her daily routines. He made calendars and charts. He set alarms on his phone to remind her to take medication. He learned to be patient when she forgot his name or didn't recognize him. Taking care of his mother had changed him. It forced him to grow up faster than other kids his age, but it also taught him something valuable. It taught him how to focus, how to solve problems, how to remember details. When you're responsible for making sure your mother eats, takes her medicine, and doesn't wander out of the apartment confused, you develop a different kind of intelligence. David had developed a nearly photographic memory out of necessity. He had to remember his mother's medication schedules, doctor appointments, what she had eaten, what she needed to do. He couldn't write everything down because she would find the notes and get upset, feeling like she was being watched or controlled. So he kept it all in his head. That skill transferred to his schoolwork. He could read a textbook chapter once and remember almost everything. He could look at a math problem and see the solution. He could listen to a lecture and recall it word for word days later. None of the students at Westwood Academy knew any of this. They looked at his old clothes and his quiet demeanor and assumed he was just another struggling kid from a poor neighborhood. They had no idea what he was capable of. While the rice finished cooking, David opened his laptop and started researching the state academic decathlon. He read through past competitions, studied the types of questions asked, looked at the topics covered. The competition was comprehensive, covering everything from advanced mathematics and science to literature, history, and current events. Most students preparing for this would have tutors, study groups, expensive prep books. David had his laptop in the public library, but he had something else too. He had motivation. Principal Mitchell had challenged him, practically dared him to fail. The man had looked at David and decided he wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough, didn't belong. David was going to prove him wrong. Over the next few days, David fell into a new routine. He would wake up at 5 in the morning before his mother woke up. He would study for 2 hours, covering different subjects each day. Mathematics on Monday, science on Tuesday, literature on Wednesday, history on Thursday. Friday was for review. Then he would make breakfast for his mother, make sure she took her medication and prepare her lunch. He would leave notes around the apartment reminding her of important things, but phrased casually so she wouldn't feel patronized. Your favorite show is on at 2 p.m. today, or I left cookies on the counter for you. Then he would take 2 buses to Westwood, attend his classes, endure the suspicious looks and whispered conversations. During lunch, instead of feeling lonely, he would use the time to study more. The library was quiet and nobody bothered him there. After school, he would take 2 buses back home, check on his mother, make dinner, and then study some more until late at night. On weekends, he would spend entire days at the public library, reading and learning. His mother noticed the change. On one of her clearer days, she asked him about it. You're working so hard, sweetheart, she said. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, Mom. I just have a competition coming up at school. You're going to do great, she said, touching his cheek with her hand. You're so smart. You've always been so smart. I'm proud of you. David felt tears sting his eyes, but he blinked them away. His mother didn't remember a lot of things anymore, but she remembered that she loved him. That was enough, thanks, Mom. Your father would be proud too, she said quietly. David's father had died when he was 8. A construction accident that left them with almost nothing. That's when the struggles really began. I know, David said. As David lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling with textbook information swimming through his head, he thought about Principal Mitchell. The man had tried to intimidate him, tried to push him out. He had made assumptions based on where David came from, how he dressed, how he looked. But the principal had made a mistake. He had given David a challenge without knowing what David was capable of. He had tested the wrong person. David smiled in the darkness. Let them all underestimate him. Let them think he didn't belong. He would show up to that academic decathlon and shock every single one of them. The test had been set. But the real question was whether Principal Mitchell was ready for the results. Monday morning came and David showed up for his first academic decathlon practice. The meeting was held in one of the conference rooms near the library. When he walked in, 5 other students were already there, sitting around a long table. They all looked up when he entered, and David could see the judgment in their eyes. The team captain was a girl named Claire, who wore designer clothes and had the confidence of someone who had never been told no in her life. Next to her sat twins, both wearing matching expensive watches. The other 2 students looked equally privileged and uncomfortable with David's presence. You must be David, Claire said, not bothering to hide her tone. Principal Mitchell told us you'd be joining. That's right, David said, taking a seat at the end of the table. Claire didn't waste time with pleasantries. Let me be clear. We've been working toward this competition for months. We don't have time to catch anyone up or slow down for people who can't keep pace. If you can't handle the workload, it's better if you drop out now. David met her eyes. I'll manage. The practice was intense. Claire threw questions at everyone, covering topics from calculus to classical literature. David answered every question directed at him correctly. He could see the surprise on their faces, though they tried to hide it. By the end of the 2-hour session, the other students weren't looking at him with quite as much contempt. Now there was confusion mixed in. Over the next week, David continued to prove himself. He showed up to every practice prepared. He answered questions faster than the other students. He helped explain concepts when others struggled. Slowly, grudgingly, the team started to accept that maybe he belonged there after all. But the thefts at school continued. On Thursday, another student reported a missing laptop from the arts building. On Friday, someone's designer purse disappeared from the gym locker room. The school was buzzing with anxiety and suspicion. Some students had started locking their valuables in their cars instead of keeping them in lockers. Principal Mitchell increased security, adding more cameras and having security guards patrol the hallways more frequently, but still items kept disappearing. David felt the suspicious looks following him everywhere. Even though he was proving himself academically, some students still believed he was responsible. He overheard conversations in the hallways, whispers that stopped when he walked by. On Friday afternoon, everything changed. David was in the library, studying for practice, when he heard a commotion outside. Raised voices, the sound of someone running. He looked up from his book and saw students gathering near the administrative offices. Curiosity got the better of him. He closed his book and walked over to see what was happening. A crowd had formed near the main office. Security guards were there, and Principal Mitchell was standing in the hallway with his arms crossed, looking angrier than David had ever seen him. "What's going on?" David asked a student standing nearby. "They caught someone stealing," the student whispered back. "In the act. Going through lockers in the senior hallway." David's heart started pounding. Finally, proof that it wasn't him. Who was it? The student turned to look at him, eyes wide. Tyler Bennett. David knew that name. Everyone at Westwood knew Tyler Bennett. His father was Richard Bennett, one of the school's biggest donors. The Bennett family had given hundreds of thousands of dollars to the school over the years. Tyler was popular, played on the lacrosse team, drove a BMW to school. "Tyler Bennett?" David repeated, not quite believing it. "Are you sure?" "Ms. Rodriguez caught him red-handed," the student said. She was coming back to her classroom because she forgot something and she saw him with someone else's wallet in his hand. David pushed closer to see what was happening. Through the crowd, he could see Tyler standing against the wall, looking pale and scared. His expensive designer clothes seemed ridiculous now. His usual confident smirk was gone, replaced with genuine fear. Principal Mitchell was talking to him in low, urgent tones. David couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could read the body language. The principal was angry, but he was also trying to keep things quiet. He kept glancing around at the growing crowd of students, clearly uncomfortable with how public this was becoming. A security guard approached the principal and said something. Principal Mitchell's jaw tightened. He nodded curtly and then put his hand on Tyler's shoulder, guiding him toward his office. The crowd of students watched as they disappeared behind the door. For the rest of the day, the school was filled with gossip and speculation. Tyler Bennett caught stealing. It didn't make sense to most people. His family was wealthy. He had everything. Why would he steal? But David understood. He had seen enough of human nature to know that stealing wasn't always about need. Sometimes it was about other things: control, excitement, rebellion. Or maybe Tyler had problems nobody knew about. David went home that afternoon feeling a strange mix of emotions. He was relieved that the real thief had been caught. That suspicion would finally shift away from him. But he was also angry. Principal Mitchell had been so quick to suspect him, so ready to believe the worst based on nothing but assumptions. And now that the real culprit was revealed to be from a wealthy family, would the principal be just as quick to punish him? Over the weekend, David heard through the student gossip network what had really happened. Tyler had been stealing for weeks. He had a gambling problem that his parents knew nothing about. He had lost thousands of dollars betting on sports online, and had been stealing items from other students to sell and cover his debts. But here's what made David's blood boil. Tyler wasn't being expelled. He wasn't even being suspended. Principal Mitchell had agreed to handle the situation discreetly. Tyler would return the stolen items, pay for anything that couldn't be returned, and attend counseling. His parents would make a significant donation to the school for the inconvenience, and in exchange, the matter would be kept quiet. No police report, no permanent record, no consequences that would affect his future college applications. David thought about what would have happened if he had been caught with stolen items. There would have been no discretion, no second chances, no quiet solutions. He would have been arrested, expelled, his scholarship revoked. His entire future would have been destroyed. The double standard was so obvious it hurt. When a poor kid from Riverside was suspected, the principal couldn't move fast enough to push him out. But when a rich kid from a donor family was caught red-handed, suddenly there were circumstances to consider, mistakes to forgive, futures to protect. On Monday morning, David walked into school expecting Principal Mitchell to call him to the office. Surely now the man would apologize. would acknowledge that he had been wrong to suspect David, wrong to treat him with such distrust. But the call never came. David saw Principal Mitchell in the hallway between classes. The principal saw him too. Their eyes met for just a second, and then Principal Mitchell looked away and kept walking, as if David wasn't even there. No apology. No acknowledgement. Nothing. David stood there in the hallway, students flowing around him, and felt his resolve harden into something like steel. The principal was too proud to admit he had been wrong, too invested in his assumptions to face the truth. He would rather pretend the whole thing never happened than admit he had judged someone unfairly. Fine, David thought. He didn't need an apology. He didn't need validation from someone like Principal Mitchell. What he needed was to win that academic decathlon. Not for the school, not for the team, but for himself. To prove that his worth wasn't determined by someone else's prejudice or assumptions. The academic decathlon was in 1 week, and David was ready. The week before the state academic decathlon felt like both the longest and shortest week of David's life. Every morning he woke up at 5 o'clock when the sky was still dark. His mother would still be sleeping in her room, and the apartment building would be quiet except for the occasional sound of a neighbor getting ready for an early shift. David would make himself instant coffee, the cheap kind that didn't taste great but gave him the caffeine he needed. Then he would sit at the small kitchen table with his laptop and his notebooks, studying by the light of the single overhead bulb. Mathematics first. He would work through problems, checking his answers, pushing himself to solve them faster each time. The academic decathlon had a speed round where every second counted. David practiced until he could look at an equation and see the solution almost instantly. Then science. He reviewed chemistry formulas, physics principles, biology concepts. He made flashcards and tested himself repeatedly. He read scientific journals and articles about recent discoveries, knowing that current events in science were often included in competitions like this. Literature was his favorite. He had always loved reading ever since he was a kid, but now he approached it differently. He studied the themes, the symbolism, the historical context of famous works. He memorized quotes and analyzed writing styles. He read essays by literary critics and learned to discuss books the way scholars did. History required memorization, which played to David's strengths. Dates, events, causes, and effects, all of it stayed in his mind like a perfectly organized library. He could recall specific details about wars, political movements, cultural shifts. He studied world history and American history, ancient civilizations, and modern politics. By 6:30, his mother would usually wake up. David would stop studying and make breakfast for both of them. Some mornings she was clear-minded and would talk about her plans for the day, maybe watching her favorite TV shows or working on a puzzle. Other mornings she was confused, asking him questions about people who didn't exist or events that never happened. On those confused mornings, David would patiently guide her through breakfast, remind her where she was and what day it was, help her settle into her chair by the window with a photo album or a magazine. Then he would leave for school, worry gnawing at him the entire bus ride. At school, David poured everything into preparation. The academic decathlon practice sessions had become more intense. Claire, the team captain, had stopped treating him with open contempt and now just treated him with business-like efficiency. The other team members had accepted that David knew his stuff, even if they weren't ready to be friendly. During lunch, David continued his habit of studying in the library, but now occasionally 1 or 2 team members would join him, not to socialize but to study together. They would quiz each other, share notes, and discuss strategies for the competition. "You're actually really good at this," one of the twins said to him one day, sounding surprised. David looked up from his book. "Thanks. Where did you learn all this stuff? I mean, your old school didn't have programs like this, right?" David felt the familiar defensiveness rising in his chest, but he pushed it down. The question wasn't mean-spirited. It was genuinely curious. "I taught myself," David said. "Libraries are free. So is knowledge if you're willing to look for it." The twin nodded slowly, as if this idea had never occurred to him before. "That's actually pretty cool." It was a small moment, but it mattered to David. Maybe not all of these students were terrible. Maybe some of them were just products of their environment, never having to think beyond their comfortable bubbles. The days blurred together in a haze of studying and practice. David's routine became mechanical. Wake up, study, take care of mom, Go to school, attend classes, practice with the team. Go home, take care of mom, study more, sleep for a few hours, repeat. He was exhausted. His eyes hurt from reading. His brain felt overloaded with information. But he kept pushing, because he knew what was waiting at the end of this week. The competition. His chance to prove himself. On Wednesday, 3 days before the competition, Principal Mitchell stopped by the practice session. He stood in the doorway watching them work. David felt the man's eyes on him specifically, evaluating, judging. When practice ended, the principal asked to speak with Claire privately. David gathered his things slowly, curious about what they were discussing. He couldn't hear the conversation, but he saw Claire nodding seriously, glancing over at him once or twice. After Claire left the principal's office, David caught up with her in the hallway. What did he want? Claire looked uncomfortable. He was asking about how you're doing with the team, whether you're keeping up. And what did you tell him? Claire met his eyes. I told him the truth, that you're one of our strongest members, that we'd be stupid to compete without you. David felt surprise flood through him. Coming from Claire, who had initially been so hostile, this was high praise. He didn't look happy about it, Claire added. I don't know what his problem is with you, but I don't really care. We're going to win this competition and you're going to help us do it. It wasn't exactly friendship, but it was respect. David would take it. That evening, David came home to find his mother having a particularly bad day. She didn't recognize the apartment at first and got agitated, asking where they were and why they were in someone else's home. It took David almost an hour to calm her down, to help her remember, to get her settled. By the time she was calm and watching television, it was already 9 o'clock at night. David still had hours of studying to do. He made himself another cup of coffee and opened his books, but his mind kept drifting to his mother. She was getting worse. The episodes were becoming more frequent. He tried not to think about what that meant for the future. He forced himself to focus on the present. The competition was in 3 days. After that, he could worry about everything else. On Friday, the day before the competition, the team had their final practice session. Principal Mitchell was there again, along with a few teachers who would be accompanying them to the competition. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone knew tomorrow was the real deal. They ran through practice questions for 2 hours straight. David's team dominated every category. When someone stumbled on an answer, another team member would back them up. They had become a real team despite their rocky start. At the end of practice, Principal Mitchell addressed them. Tomorrow you'll be representing Westwood Academy in front of schools from across the state. I expect you to conduct yourselves with the excellence and dignity that Westwood is known for. Make us proud. His eyes lingered on David for just a moment, and David could read the unspoken message. Don't embarrass us. Don't prove that I was right about you. David looked right back at him with steady confidence. Tomorrow, he would show everyone exactly what he was capable of. The principal thought he was testing David, putting him in a position to fail. But the real test was just beginning, and it wasn't David who was being evaluated anymore. That night, David couldn't sleep. He lay in his small bed, listening to the sounds of the apartment building settling around him. His mother was snoring softly in the next room. Tomorrow would change everything. He could feel it. He wasn't nervous exactly. He was ready. He had prepared for this more thoroughly than he had prepared for anything in his life. But he was aware of the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about winning a competition. This was about proving that where you started didn't determine where you could go, that being underestimated could be a strength, that someone like him could stand next to anyone and be just as good, if not better. David closed his eyes and finally drifted off to sleep, dreaming of questions and answers, of proving everyone wrong. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and cool air. David woke up even earlier than usual, at 4:30 in the morning. He hadn't slept well, his mind racing with information and possibilities. But now that the day was here, he felt strangely calm. He got dressed carefully, choosing his best clothes. They weren't expensive, but they were clean and neat. His mother had helped him iron his shirt the night before during one of her clear moments. She had told him she was proud of him, even though she didn't fully understand what the competition was about. Before he left, David checked on his mother one more time. She was still sleeping peacefully. He had arranged for Mrs. Liu from next door to look in on her throughout the day. He left detailed notes about meals and medication, along with his phone number in case of emergency. The competition was being held at the State University about an hour away. Westwood had arranged a bus for the team and the teachers accompanying them. David arrived at the school at 6:30 in the morning to find the bus already waiting, its engine running and exhaust puffing into the cold air. The other team members were already there, standing in a cluster with their families. Parents were taking pictures, giving last-minute advice, hugging their kids. David stood off to the side, alone, watching this display of support and privilege. Claire noticed him and walked over. "Ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," David replied. "You're going to do great," she said. Then, more quietly, "We all are." Principal Mitchell emerged from the school building, looking official in a suit and tie. He carried a briefcase and wore an expression of serious determination. This competition clearly mattered to him. Westwood had never won the state championship, and Mitchell wanted that trophy for his display case. "Everyone on the bus," he announced. "We leave in 5 minutes." The drive to the university felt longer than an hour. David sat near the back of the bus, watching the landscape change outside his window. The other students chatted nervously, some reviewing flashcards, others listening to music. Principal Mitchell sat at the front, occasionally checking his phone and looking tense. When they finally arrived at the university, David was struck by the size of the campus. Buildings stretched out in every direction. Students walked along pathways, and there was an energy in the air that felt different from high school. This was a place where people came to learn by choice, to pursue knowledge for its own sake. The competition was being held in the main auditorium. When they walked inside, David saw teams from schools all over the state. There were at least 20 teams, each wearing matching shirts or uniforms with their school names. Some schools had brought dozens of supporters, parents, students, even local news crews. Westwood's team checked in at the registration table and received their team number. They were assigned to Table 7. David followed his teammates to their designated area, feeling the eyes of other teams watching them. Westwood Academy had a reputation. Everyone knew they were well-funded, well-prepared, and serious contenders. The competition began with an opening ceremony. A university official welcomed everyone and explained the format. There would be 3 rounds. First, a written test covering all subjects. Second, a team collaboration round where they would work together to solve complex problems. Finally, the Speed Quiz Bowl, where individuals would compete head-to-head answering questions as fast as possible. The written test came first. David sat at his desk with a pencil and a thick test booklet. When the proctor said begin, he opened it and started working. The questions were challenging, exactly as difficult as he had expected. But he had prepared for this. He worked steadily through mathematics, science, literature, history, and current events. He finished with 10 minutes to spare and used the time to check his answers. He found 2 small mistakes and corrected them. When time was called, he felt confident he had done well. During the break between rounds, the team gathered outside. Everyone looked stressed except David, who appeared calm. "How did everyone feel about that?" Claire asked. The twins groaned. The science section was brutal. Math wasn't easy either, another team member added. They all looked at David. "How about you?" "It was fair," David said simply. "Nothing we weren't prepared for." Principal Mitchell approached the group. "The team round starts in 15 minutes. This is where collaboration matters. Work together, use each other's strengths, and stay focused." The team round was different. They were given a complex scenario involving economics, environmental science, and social policy. They had to work together to develop a comprehensive solution and present it to judges. This round was worth significant points. David's team worked well together. Claire organized their approach. The twins focused on the economic aspects. David handled the scientific components and helped tie everything together. They finished their presentation just as time was called. Then came lunch break. Most teams went to the campus cafeteria, but David had brought his own lunch from home to save money. He found a quiet spot outside and ate his sandwich while reviewing notes for the final round. The Speed Quiz Bowl was what David had been waiting for. This was where individual skill mattered most. Each team would send forward their best competitor for different subjects. Points were awarded for correct answers, with time bonuses for faster responses. When the mathematics round was announced, Claire looked at David. "You're up." David walked to the front of the auditorium where 6 chairs were set up, one for each team's representative. He sat down and put on the headphones they provided. A screen in front of him would display questions and he would type his answers on the keyboard. The mathematics round began. Questions appeared on his screen one after another. Complex calculus problems, probability questions, geometric proofs. David's fingers flew across the keyboard. He barely needed to think. The answers came to him instantly, as if his brain had become a machine designed for this exact purpose. He finished the mathematics round with a perfect score and the fastest time. When he returned to his team, they were staring at him with something like awe. "That was incredible," one of the twins said. David just shrugged, but inside he felt a surge of satisfaction. This was what he had prepared for. This was his moment. The competition continued through the afternoon. David competed in the science round and dominated again. Perfect score, fastest time. The pattern repeated in literature and history. Each time he returned to his seat, his teammates looked more impressed. Other teams started noticing too. Whispers spread through the auditorium about the competitor from Westwood who was crushing every round. Principal Mitchell watched from the audience, his expression unreadable. David caught his eye once between rounds. The principal looked away quickly, but not before David saw something in his face. Was it surprise? Discomfort? Maybe even shame? As the final round concluded, the judges announced they would tally the scores and announce results in 30 minutes. The auditorium buzzed with nervous energy. Teams gathered in clusters trying to calculate how they had done, predicting outcomes. David sat quietly, feeling the exhaustion finally hitting him. He had given everything he had to this competition. Now all he could do was wait. Claire sat down next to him. "Regardless of how this turns out, you were amazing today. I've never seen anyone compete like that." "Thanks," David said. "I owe you an apology," Claire continued. "I judged you when you first joined the team. I assumed you wouldn't be able to keep up. I was wrong." David looked at her and saw genuine sincerity in her expression. "I appreciate that." The proctor's voice came over the microphone. "Teams, please return to your seats. We're ready to announce the results." This was it. The moment everything had been building toward. David walked back to his seat, his heart pounding, ready to hear the outcome of the test that Principal Mitchell had never expected him to pass. The auditorium fell silent as the head judge approached the microphone. She was a distinguished-looking woman with gray hair, wearing academic robes that indicated she was a professor at the university. She held a folder containing the results and her expression gave nothing away. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began. "First, I want to congratulate all the teams who competed today. The level of excellence we witnessed was truly remarkable. These students represent the best and brightest from schools across our state." David felt his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. Next to him, his teammates sat rigid with tension. Across the auditorium, he could see Principal Mitchell sitting in the audience section, leaning forward slightly. "Before we announce the winners," the judge continued, "I want to highlight some exceptional individual performances. In the Speed Quiz Bowl rounds, we saw some truly outstanding displays of knowledge and quick thinking." She paused, looking down at her notes. In the mathematics round, one competitor achieved a perfect score with a completion time that broke the previous record for this competition. That competitor was David Chen from Westwood Academy. Applause filled the auditorium. David felt his teammates patting him on the back, heard people around them murmuring in impressed tones. He kept his expression neutral, but inside, his heart was soaring. The same competitor, the judge continued, also achieved perfect scores with record-breaking times in the science, literature, and history rounds. In 15 years of running this competition, I have never seen anyone dominate the individual rounds so completely. The applause grew louder. David could feel hundreds of eyes on him. He glanced toward where Principal Mitchell was sitting and saw the man's face had gone pale. The principal was staring at David with an expression of complete shock. "Now for the team results," the judge said, and the auditorium fell silent again. In third place, with a score of 847 points, Harrison Preparatory Academy. Applause and cheers from one section of the auditorium. The Harrison team stood up, hugging each other despite not winning first place. In second place, with a score of 892 points, Lincoln Heights Academy. More applause. David felt his chest tightening. They had to be first. They had to be, the judge smiled. and in first place with a score of 963 points, the highest score in the history of this competition, Westwood Academy. The auditorium erupted. David's teammates jumped to their feet screaming and hugging each other. Claire grabbed David and pulled him into a hug. The twins were high-fiving everyone. Teachers from Westwood were on their feet applauding. David stood there letting the moment wash over him. They had won. Not just won, but demolished the competition, set a new record, proved beyond any doubt that they belonged at the top. Teams, please come forward to receive your awards, the judge announced. David walked to the stage with his teammates. They were all grinning, some with tears in their eyes. The third-place team received their trophy first, then second place. Finally, it was Westwood's turn. The judge presented the large trophy to Claire as team captain, but then she turned to address the audience again. I'd like to ask David Chen to step forward. David's stomach dropped. What was happening? David, your individual performance today was extraordinary. You scored perfect marks in 4 separate categories and broke 4 different speed records. The judges were unanimous in naming you the competition's most outstanding competitor. She handed him a smaller trophy, a crystal award with his name already engraved on it. The crowd gave him a standing ovation. David stood there holding the trophy, overwhelmed by the moment. This was real. This was actually happening. As the ceremony concluded and teams began gathering for photos, David saw Principal Mitchell making his way through the crowd toward the stage. The principal's expression was complicated, a mix of emotions David couldn't quite read. David stepped down from the stage, still holding his trophy. His teammates were caught up in celebrations with their families, taking pictures, hugging parents who had driven up to watch. David stood slightly apart, having no one there to celebrate with him. That's when Principal Mitchell reached him. The man stopped a few feet away, seeming unsure of what to say or do. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The principal who had doubted him, and the student who had proven him wrong in the most public way possible. That was quite a performance, Principal Mitchell finally said. His voice stiff. Thank you, David replied, keeping his tone neutral. The trophy presentation will be in 5 minutes. As team members, we all need to be on stage together for the photographs. Of course. The principal started to turn away, then stopped. David, He paused, seeming to struggle with words. Your contributions to the team were significant. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even really an acknowledgement of everything that had happened between them. But it was something, a small crack in the principal's armor of pride. I know they were, David said quietly. That's what I've been trying to tell you. Principal Mitchell's jaw tightened. He looked like he wanted to say more but couldn't quite bring himself to do it. Finally, he just nodded and walked away. The formal trophy presentation was everything Principal Mitchell had probably dreamed of. Photographers from local newspapers were there. The university president gave a speech about excellence in education. Westwood's team stood on stage holding their trophy while camera flashes went off. David stood with his teammates, and for the first time since arriving at Westwood Academy, he felt like he truly belonged there. Not because anyone had given him permission, but because he had earned it. He had proven his worth in the most objective way possible, in a competition where bias and assumptions couldn't change the facts. After the official ceremony ended, several people approached David. Other coaches wanted to know where he had trained, what preparation program he had used. Students from other schools asked for advice. Even some of his own teammates' parents, who had probably looked down on him before, now wanted to congratulate him and take photos with him. Through it all, David remained humble and polite. He answered questions, posed for photos, and accepted congratulations. But inside he was thinking about his mother, alone in their small apartment. He was thinking about all the early mornings studying, all the nights he went to bed exhausted. He was thinking about every person who had underestimated him, every assumption that had been made about him based on where he came from. And he was thinking about Principal Mitchell's face when the results were announced. That look of shock, of disbelief, of being forced to confront the fact that he had been wrong. As the crowd finally began to thin and teams started heading to their buses, Claire approached David one more time. Hey, a bunch of us are going out to celebrate, getting dinner in town. Want to come? David thought about the 2 bus rides home, about his mother waiting for him. About the small apartment that was nothing like the restaurants these students probably frequented. "I can't," he said. "I need to get home. But thank you for asking." Claire nodded, understanding in her eyes. "You were the star today, you know. We couldn't have done this without you." "We did it together," David said. "That's what made it work." On the bus ride back to Westwood, David sat in his usual spot at the back, holding his trophy. The sun was setting outside the window, painting the sky orange and pink. The other students were celebrating, passing around their phones showing pictures from the day, reliving the best moments. Principal Mitchell sat at the front of the bus, quiet and alone, staring out the window. David looked at the trophy in his hands, at his name engraved on it, at the words, "Most Outstanding Competitor." This was proof that couldn't be argued with, couldn't be dismissed or explained away. He had been tested and he had passed with flying colors. But the real test hadn't been his. It had been Principal Mitchell's test of character, of fairness, of the ability to see past his own prejudices. And that was a test the principal had failed. David wondered if the man understood that yet. The bus pulled into the Westwood Academy parking lot just as darkness settled completely over the campus. The building's exterior lights illuminated the pristine grounds, and the fountain in the front courtyard sparkled under the spotlights. It looked like something from a movie, this wealthy school where David had fought so hard to prove himself. Students gathered their things and began filing off the bus. Parents who had been waiting rushed forward to congratulate their children, hugging them and asking about every detail of the competition. David watched this display of family support with a familiar ache in his chest. He was happy for them, but it reminded him of what he didn't have. He stood up, holding his trophy carefully, and made his way to the front of the bus. As he stepped down onto the pavement, he saw Principal Mitchell standing near the school entrance. The man was talking to some parents, probably explaining the victory, taking credit for the school's success. David started walking toward the street where he would catch his first bus home. He was exhausted, emotionally and physically drained. All he wanted was to get home, check on his mother, and maybe sleep for 12 hours straight. "David, wait." He turned to see Principal Mitchell walking toward him. The parents had left, and now it was just the two of them in the parking lot. The celebration noise from other students faded into the background. The principal stopped a few feet away, and for the first time since David had met him, the man looked uncertain. His usual confidence and authority seemed diminished somehow. He stood there in his expensive suit holding a briefcase, looking at a 17-year-old student in second-hand clothes who was holding a trophy that neither of them had expected him to win. "Yes, Principal Mitchell?" David asked, his voice neutral. "I wanted to speak with you before you left." The principal paused, seeming to search for words. "What you accomplished today was remarkable. The school board will be very pleased. This kind of recognition is valuable for Westwood's reputation." David said nothing, just waited. He could see there was more the principal wanted to say, but couldn't quite bring himself to say it. "The trophy presentation is scheduled for Monday morning," Principal Mitchell continued. "There will be an assembly. Local media will be there. I'll need you and the rest of the team to be present." "I'll be there," David said. Another pause. The principal shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "David, about the situation a few weeks ago. The missing items, the accusations. You mean when you assumed I was a thief because I'm from a poor neighborhood?" David interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. "When you called me into your office and basically told me I didn't belong here? When you challenged me to prove myself, not because you believed in me, but because you wanted me to fail?" Principal Mitchell's face reddened. "I never formally accused you of anything. No, you didn't. You were too careful for that. You just made sure I knew what you thought of me, what you assumed about me based on where I come from and how I look. I was concerned about the school's environment, about maintaining standards. Your standards are based on money and zip codes, not on character or intelligence," David said. His voice steady despite the anger burning in his chest. "You gave Tyler Bennett a pass because his family donates to the school. You would have expelled me for the same thing without a second thought. Don't pretend this is about standards. It's about prejudice." Principal Mitchell opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. He looked like he had been slapped. Around them, the parking lot was emptying out as students and parents left. Soon they would be completely alone. "You challenged me to join that team," David continued, "thinking it would prove you were right about me. You wanted me to fail so you could justify pushing me out, Well, I didn't fail. I exceeded every expectation, broke records, and won awards. And you still can't bring yourself to apologize. You still can't admit that you were wrong. The principal stood there silent, his face a mixture of shame and stubborn pride. The man was clearly struggling with something internal, but David didn't care anymore about his discomfort. I proved I belong at Westwood, David said. Not to you, because I don't need your approval. I proved it to myself, and that's all that matters. He started to walk away, heading toward the street and the bus stop that would take him home. But he stopped after a few steps and turned back. You know what the saddest part is, Principal Mitchell? You run a school. Your job is supposed to be about educating young people, about helping them reach their potential regardless of where they start. But you've forgotten that. You've turned Westwood into a place where only certain types of students are valued, where wealth matters more than talent, where assumptions matter more than truth. David held up his trophy. This represents what I accomplished in spite of you, not because of you. You tested me, Principal Mitchell, but you failed your own test. You failed to see past your prejudices. You failed to treat a student fairly. You failed to be the kind of educator who actually makes a difference. The principal's face had gone very pale. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. He just stood there, frozen, as David's words hung in the air between them. David turned and walked away for real this time. He walked across the parking lot, past the expensive cars, past the perfectly maintained grounds, toward the ordinary street where he would catch his bus. Behind him he heard nothing. No footsteps following, no voice calling him back. Just silence. As he reached the street, David allowed himself to look back one more time. Principal Mitchell was still standing in the same spot, not moving, just staring after him. Even from this distance, David could see the man's expression. It was the look of someone who had been forced to see himself clearly for the first time, and didn't like what he saw. It was the look of someone who had been left speechless. David turned away and kept walking. The night air was cold, but he didn't mind. He held his trophy close, feeling its weight, feeling what it represented. This wasn't just about winning a competition. This was about dignity, about refusing to let someone else's limited view define who you were or what you could accomplish. The bus arrived and David climbed aboard, finding a seat near the back. As the bus pulled away from Westwood Academy, he watched the school disappear behind him. Tomorrow he would go back there. He would walk those hallways, sit in those classes, continue his education. But something had changed fundamentally. He had proven that he belonged there. Not just academically, but as a human being worthy of respect and fair treatment. And if Principal Mitchell couldn't see that, couldn't acknowledge that, then that was the principal's failure, not David's. David thought about Monday's assembly, about standing on that stage in front of the entire school while Principal Mitchell presented the trophy. The man would have to stand there next to David, would have to publicly acknowledge his success, would have to smile for the cameras while knowing what David had said to him tonight. And David would be polite. He would shake the principal's hand. He would accept the recognition graciously. But they would both know the truth of what had happened here. They would both know who had really been tested and who had failed. The bus rumbled through the night, taking David back to his neighborhood, back to his small apartment, back to his mother, who might not even remember that today was competition day. But that was okay. David would remember enough for both of them. He looked down at his trophy one more time, at his name engraved in the crystal. Most outstanding competitor. He had earned this, and no one could ever take it away from him or diminish what it meant. The test was over. David had passed, and Principal Mitchell would have to live with the knowledge that he had failed the most important test of all, the test of his own character.